We're live in Charleston, South Carolina. It's debate night after a dramatic day in the Republican race for president. Iowa declares a new winner. Rick Perry bows out. And 35 hours before the polls open here in South Carolina, we have a dead heat. The Southern Republican presidential debate starts right now.
Ron Paul, the insurgent, a powerful force in the first contests with an army of young voters.
We are dangerous to the status quo of this country.
Now, South Carolina is ready to put its stamp on the 2012 presidential race.
The President of the United States.
Welcome to Charleston and the fight for the South.
Joining us on stage first, the Texas Congressman, Ron Paul. Congressman Paul.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here tonight. I'm a congressman from Texas. I've been elected for 12 times, and also I practiced OBGYN for a 30-year period. I've also served 5 years in the military, and I'm the only U.S. veteran on this stage tonight.
Governor Perry quickly and forcefully endorsed Speaker Gingrich. And in that remark, he said that, no, Mr. Gingrich is not a perfect man. Senator Santorum, he said none of us are. And he said he believes in his Christian faith. It guides him to the value of redemption. Speaker Gingrich doesn't believe this is an issue. Governor Perry says this is not an issue. I just want to start with you, sir, and go down. Do you believe it is?
I think too often all of us are on the receiving ends of attacks from the media, and it's very disturbing because sometimes they're not based on facts, and we suffer the consequences. You know, sometimes it reminds me of this idea of getting corporations out of running campaigns, but what about the corporations that run the media? I mean, they're always in charge. And I think our responsibility, since sorting facts and fiction, the people have to sort this out. But I think setting standards are very important, and I'm very proud that my wife of 54 years is with me tonight.
All right, as I said at the top of the debate, we'll take some questions from the audience. We've reached out to people online. We've also reached out to a number of voters, some who wish they could be here tonight but can't be here tonight. I want to turn to a question from one of those voters. Her name is Jane Gallagher. She's from here in South Carolina. As all of you know, and as everyone in this audience from South Carolina knows, we're in a state with 9.9% unemployment. And Jane asked this question. List 3 or more specific programs that will put American people back to work. Congressman Paul, I want to begin with you. Do you believe we need specific federal programs to put the American people back to work?
Well, most of the things the federal government could do to get us back to work is get out of the way. I'd like to name... I'd like to see the federal government have a sound currency. That creates a healthy economy. I would like to see massive reduction of regulations. I would like to see income tax reduced to near zero as possible. And that is what we have to do. We have to get the government out of the way. We have to recognize why we have unemployment. And it comes because we have a deeply flawed financial system that causes financial bubbles. The bubbles burst and you have the unemployment. Now, the most important thing to get over that hump that was created artificially by bad economic policies is to allow the correction to occur. You have to get rid of the excessive debt. You have to get rid of the malinvestment. And you don't do that by buying the debt off the people who were benefiting from it. So we, the people, shouldn't be stuck with these debts on these mortgage derivatives and all. We need to get that behind us, which means the government shouldn't be doing any bailout. So most of the things to improve the environment is getting the government out of the way and enforce contract laws and enforce bankruptcy laws.
Many of those veterans who have served post 9/11, served honorably in Iraq and Afghanistan, are coming back to a terrible economy. Right now, unemployment rate for post 9/11 veterans aged 18 to 24 is at 22%. Congressman Paul, to you first, sir. Should the federal government be specifically targeting that part, or veterans coming back saying the unemployment rate is so high among that subgroup that the federal government should offer a tax incentive to employers or take other steps to help them, to incentivize the economy, to help them get jobs?
To some degree, but you really want to make the environment, the economy healthy for everybody and not designate special places. But to help them out to come back is probably necessary on some occasions now. But we have to think about how serious our problems are here, because we faced something much, much greater after World War II. We had 10 million came home all at once. But what did we do then? There were some of the liberals back then that said, oh, we have to have more work programs and do this and that. And they thought they would have to, do everything conceivable for those 10 million. They never got around to it because they came home so quickly. But you know what the government did? They cut the budget by 60%. They cut taxes by 30%. By that time, the debt had been liquidated, and everybody went back to work again. You didn't need any special programs. So but the one thing, talking about concern about the military and the veterans, I'm very proud that, I get twice as many donations from the active military people than all the rest put together. So I am very concerned about them. I think where the real problem is we can create a healthy economic environment if we did the right things. But where the veterans really deserve help, both as a physician and as a congressman, is the people who come back and aren't doing well health-wise. They need a lot more help. We have an epidemic now of suicide of our military coming back. So they need a lot of medical help, and I think they come up shortchanged. They came up shortchanged after Vietnam War, Persian Gulf War, and even now. They don't get care from the Veterans Administration.
I think we all agree there's a generational challenge for the country with the brain injuries and the other injuries and the suicide, as you mentioned. Congressman Paul, you have the floor. Do you trust these men to repeal Obamacare?
Thank you. I thought maybe you were prejudiced against doctors and a doctor that practiced medicine in the military or something. No, I want to address the question. The gentleman asked whether he thinks we can repeal Obamacare. Theoretically, we can. The likelihood isn't all that good. We can diminish some of the effect, but I'm more concerned about a bigger picture of what's happening, and that is government involvement in medicine. I had the privilege of practicing medicine in the early 60s before we had any government. And it worked rather well, and there was nobody out in the street suffering with no medical care. But Medicare and Medicaid came in, and it just expanded. But even when we had the chance to cut back on it, when we had a Republican Congress and a Republican president, we gave them prescription drug programs. Senator Santorum supported it. That's expanding the government. So it's endless, and most of them are bankrupt. Prescription drugs, they're not going to be financed. Medicare is not financeable. Medicaid's in trouble. But nobody talks about where the money's going to come from. Now, even in my budget proposal, which is very, very tough because I'm going to cut $1 trillion the first year, but I try to really, even though these programs should have never started, but a lot of people are dependent on, I want to try to protect the people who are dependent on medical care. Now, where does the money come? My suggestion is look at some of the overseas spending that we don't need to be doing. We have troops in Korea since the Korean War, in Japan since World War II, in Germany since World War II. Those are subsidies to these countries. And we keep fighting these wars that don't need to be fought. They're undeclared. They never end. Newt pointed out, World War II was won in less than 4 years. Afghanistan, we're there for 10 years. Nobody says, where's the money come? We could work our way out of here and take care of these people with these medical needs, but we can't do it with the current philosophy of the government taking care of everybody forever on medical care, cradle to grave, and being the policeman of the world. We will get rid of all this government program. Unfortunately, because we're going bankrupt and you're going to have runaway inflation and our checks are going to bounce, and that's going to be a lot worse problem than we're facing tonight.
All right. I'm going to ask all of our candidates to stand by, our audience as well. Congressman Paul, I want to start with you. We reached out to your campaign this week and they said you would not release your tax returns. Why?
Well, I hadn't thought it through. I don't have an intention of doing it, but for a different reason. I'd probably be embarrassed to put my financial statement up against their income, and I don't want to be embarrassed because I don't have a greater income. Now, I mean, it may come to that, but right now I have no intention of doing that. I think with our financial statements, congressional financial statements, I think you know more about me than I know about myself. That's how my wife found out so much about what we were doing, you know, from my financial statement. Now, I don't think people need that because nobody's challenging me because I have no conflict of interest and I don't even talk to lobbyists and I don't take that kind of money. So there's no conflict.
All right. Congressman Paul, how do you revive Made in America?
You have to create the right conditions to bring these companies back, and they have to bring their capital back and shouldn't be taxed. But Apple's a great company, but the way you ask the question, it infers that because there's a bunch of workers overseas, it hasn't benefited a lot of people here. The consumers obviously have been benefited by a good company, well run. But obviously there's a lot of employees with Apple in this country as well. I don't think that's the number that you have to be concerned about. A lot of people worry about us buying and money going overseas. But if you send money to China, they say they're paying wages over there and we send dollars over there. Well, they don't put the dollars in a shoebox. They have to spend those dollars. Unfortunately, they're buying our debt and perpetuating our consumerism here and our debt here. But immediately there's a benefit to us because those dollars come back. But also, when you get products, if they're buying products cheaper over there, let's say the computer cost $100 instead of $1,000. Well, the person's just saved $900. That helps the economy. That $900 stays in that person's pocket. So whether it's shoes or a computer, so we shouldn't be frightened about trade or sending money on, but we have to look at the reason why they're doing this. I mean, even the car companies, there's obviously a problem with car companies here. They're in bigger trouble, and we had to bail them out. But there are foreign companies that build cars in this country, and they make a living out of it. So it's more complex than that, but we have to do whatever we can. I think the union problem, the right to work states, and of course I've chided Senator Santorum on this because he has voted, you know, against right to work. But we have to change these conditions to invite people back. But believe me, the regulations and the fact that we are the issuer of the reserve currency of the world is a real temporary blessing for us because it's easy for us to export our money. That's unfortunately our greatest export, and they're still taking our money. Soon, though, they're going to quit, and this whole ball game is going to end, and we better get prepared for it.
What is your take on SOPA? And how do you believe it affects Americans? For those who have not been following it, SOPA is the Stop Online Piracy Act. Crackdown on internet piracy, which is clearly a problem. But opponents say it's censorship. Full disclosure, our parent company, Time Warner, says we need a law like this because some of its products, movies, programmings, and the like, are being ripped off online. Let me start with you.
I was the first Republican to sign on with a host of Democrats to oppose this law. And we have worked... We have had a concerted effort, and I feel like we're making achievement there. This bill is not going to pass, but watch out for the next one. And I am pleased that the attitude is sort of mellowed up here because the Republicans, unfortunately, have been on the wrong side of this issue. And this is a good example on why it's good to have somebody that can look at civil liberties and work with coalitions and bring people together. Freedom and the Constitution bring factions together. I think this is a good example.
Those who support the law, Senator, argue after months of campaigning, if these candidates could do one thing over, what would it be? Congressman?
I can't think of any one thing that I would do differently, but I would continue to do what I'm always trying to do. One thing that I believe about a free society is it provides the opportunity for us to work for our own virtue and excellence. And in campaigning, I think I can still learn a lot about becoming a better deliverer of a message. And the conviction I have, but I think if I spoke a little slower and made more conviction, that I could do a better job. So I think in general, I will continue to work on delivering a message, which I think is a great message.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. Let's get back to our issues discussion, and let's begin with a question down in our audience.
Hi. I would like to ask on the issue of amnesty of the illegal aliens. How would you secure that the American citizens would keep the jobs in line first for them?
You've heard your colleagues talk about making sure employers, companies that hire large numbers of people, making sure they get the message. They can't hire illegals. What about individuals? About a quarter of the illegal immigrants in the country work for individuals. If this is a problem, if I hired an illegal immigrant, say, to clean my home, should I be prosecuted for doing that?
I don't believe you should be, because I think those laws are misdirected. That makes you the policeman, or the businessman the policeman, or the Catholic Church the policeman if they do anything to help an illegal immigrant. It should be the law enforcers, and that is the border guards and the federal government's in charge of immigration. So no, I don't agree with those laws, but that doesn't mean that I'm soft in the issue of illegal immigration. Illegal, I can't imagine anybody standing up here and saying, oh, I'm for illegal immigration. We're all against illegal immigration. But I think what we fail to do is look at the incentives. And it has a lot to do with economics. There's an economic incentive for them to come, for immigrants to come. But there's also an incentive for some of our people in this country not to take a job that's a low-paying job. You're not supposed to say that, but that is true. But there's also an economic incentive in the welfare state for immigrants to come in. In Texas, we suffer from the fact that there are federal mandates that we have to take care of their medical needs and their educational needs, and it bankrupts some of our school districts and our hospitals. So it's those mandates. But we need a more generous immigration policy. It should be legal, but we need more resources. But I find that the resources are all overseas. When I was in the military, I was on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, and that is a no man's land. You can't see the border. At least we can see the river south of Texas. We know where the Rio Grande is. Over there, we can't see it. But we're over there fighting and dying over that border, looking for problems. Why don't we take those resources and quit pretending we can defend those borders and put them on our borders and take care of our needs here?
Go ahead, Mr. Speaker.
We won a huge victory in 2010 with the largest number of pro-life members ever elected in a freshman class.
All right, let's move on. Let's take another question. Congressman, I'll bring you in on this one. Let's take a question now from social media. Question. Before we move on, you want in on this issue? They want you in on this issue. Would you like in on this issue?
But John, once again, it's a medical subject, and I'm a doctor, you know. No, I do want to make a couple comments, because I can remember the very early years studying obstetrics, and I was told, and it was before the age of abortion, and I was told, taking care of a woman that's pregnant, you have 2 patients. And I think that solves a lot of the problem about, you know, when life begins and all. But I also experienced a time later on in my training in the 1960s when the culture was changing. The Vietnam War was going on, the drugs were there, and pornography came in, and abortion became prevalent even though it was illegal. So the morality of the country changed, but then the law followed up. When the morality changed, it will reflect on the laws. The law is very important. We should have these laws, but law will not correct the basic problem, and that's the morality of the people that we must do. Now, just very, very briefly, I want to talk a little bit about that funding, because the flaw there is if you send funding out and you say, well, you can have it for birth control but not for abortion, all funds are fungible. Even funds that go to any hospital, if you say, well, it's not for birth control and it's not for Planned Parenthood, it's not for abortion, if you send it to the hospital, they can still use that money. This is an indictment of government-run medicine, because you never can sort that all out. You need the government out of that business, or you will always argue over who's paying what bills.
Very quickly, Senator.
I think that was directed at me, and so I would just say this. Congressman Paul has a national right-to-life voting record of 50%, which is pretty much what Harry Reid's national right-to-life voting record is. So to go out and say that, you know, you're someone who stands up for the right to life, you repeatedly vote against bills on a federal level to promote the right to life, and you say that this is an individual personal decision or state decision. life should be protected, and you should have the willingness to stand up on a federal level, on any level of government, and protect what our what our Declaration protects, which is the right of our Creator to life, and that is a federal issue, not a state issue.
Quickly, sir.
Well, just for the record, I wasn't even thinking about you when I was giving my statement, so you are overly sensitive. But it is true that we have a disagreement on how we approach it. I followed what my understanding is of the Constitution, and it does allow for the states to deal with difficult problems. Matter of fact, it allows the states to deal with almost all the problems if you look at it. It is not given, these powers aren't given to the Congress. I see abortion as a violent act. All other violence is handled by the states. Murder, burglary, violence, that's a state issue. So don't try to say that I'm less pro-life because I want to be particular about the way we do it and allow the states the prerogative. This is the solution. This is the solution, because if we would allow the states to write their laws, take away the jurisdiction by a majority vote in the Congress, you repeal Roe versus Wade overnight instead of waiting year after year to change the court system.
All right, we need to take one more break, gentlemen. Stand by. Less than 35 hours away now from the polls opening right here in South Carolina, a state that is crucial, often decisive in Republican presidential politics. Stay with us to hear the candidates' closing arguments to the voters of a state that takes pride in picking presidents. Make your case. Make your case. South Carolina essentially faces this decision. Not so fast. Let's continue the race, or embrace Governor Romney. Make your case to the people of South Carolina in these final hours.
Well, South Carolina is known for their respect for liberty. And a lot of people will ask the question, in a way, what will you do for South Carolina, or what will you do for New Hampshire, what will you do for the various states? But if you understand liberty, it's equal for everybody, it benefits everybody. So if you have a protection of liberty, which is the purpose of the Constitution, protection individual liberty, and that means you protect the private property rights system. And if you do that, that benefits everybody. And this is what we have to do, is convince people that we can bring people together with the understanding of what those beliefs were that made America great. And it is freedom. It isn't this continued spending money and debt. This is the reason we're in a mountain of debt, and we have to deal with it. We really never even got around to talking about that tonight. And one of my very modest proposals, my modest proposal is in the one first year, cut $1 trillion out of the budget to get started. Because the debt bubble is the great burden. It's a burden to all of us. And as I mentioned earlier, these programs are going to go down if we don't get our budget under control. And we have to be willing to look at overseas spending and all of the entitlement system here in this country.
Mr. Speaker.
Welcome to the Orange County Convention Center in Orlando, Florida, the site of our Republican presidential debate. Now, let's meet the candidates. Congressman Ron Paul.
There's growing concern among Americans about the size and the scope of the federal government and its infringement upon state and individual rights.
If you're elected president, how do you plan to restore the 10th Amendment, hold the federal government only to those enumerated powers in the Constitution, and allow states to govern themselves?
Congressman, what's your answer for Brandy and Michael?
Well, obviously it would take more than one individual, but the responsibility of the president would be to veto every single bill that violates the 10th Amendment. That would be the solution.
Anything else, sir? You got a little time left.
Well, I'll tell you what, that is the subject that is crucial, because government is too big in Washington, D.C. It's run away. We have no controls of spending, taxes, regulations, no control in the Federal Reserve printing money. So if we want government, whether it's medical care or whatever, it's proper to do it at the local level as well as our schools. But there's no authority in the Constitution to do so much of what we're doing. There's no authority for them to run our schools, no authority to control our economy, and no authority to control us as individuals on what we do with our personal lives.
Thank you, Congressman.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Stella Lohman from Atlanta, Georgia. I've taught in both public and private schools, and now as a substitute teacher. I see administrators more focused on satisfying federal mandates, retaining funding, and trying not to get sued, while the teachers are jumping through hoops, trying to serve up a one-size-fits-all education for their students. What, as president, would you seriously do about what I consider a massive overreach of big government into the classroom? Thank you.
Congressman Paul.
If you care about your children, you'll get the federal government out of the business of educating our kids. In 1980, when the Republican Party ran, part of the platform was to get rid of the Department of Education. By the year 2000, it was eliminated, and we fed on to it. Then we, as Republicans, added No Child Left Behind. So the first thing a president should do is that the goal should be set to get the government out completely, but don't enforce this law of No Child Left Behind. It's not going to do any good, and nobody likes it. And there's no value to it. The teachers don't like it, and the students don't like it. But there are other things that the federal government can do, and that is give tax credits for the people who will opt out. We ought to have a right to opt out of the public system if you want.
Congressman Paul, you have said that you believe that life begins at conception and that abortion ends an innocent life. If you believe that, how can you support a rape exception to abortion bans? And how can you support the morning after pill? Aren't those lives just as innocent?
They may be, but the way this is taken care of in our country, it is not a national issue. This is a state issue. And there are circumstances where doctors in the past have used certain day after pills for somebody with rape. And quite frankly, if somebody is treated, you don't even know if a person is pregnant. You don't even know if there's a disease. But if it's 24 hours after rape, I don't know how you're going to police it. So I don't think you should create. We have too many laws already. Now, how are you going to police the day after pill? It doesn't make any sense to me in a practical matter. So I would say that nobody can outdo me on respect for life. I've spent a lifetime dealing with life, but I still think there is a time where the law doesn't solve the problems. Only the moral character of the people will eventually solve this problem, not the law.
Independent New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg recently fretted over the possibility of the unemployed rioting in the streets. Ohio's Republican Governor John Kasich recently said, quote, "For the first time in my life, I'm worried about this country." And recently a liberal columnist wrote this, quote, "We've lost our mojo." You know, President Obama promised hope and change, and according to many polls, fewer and fewer Americans believe he's delivered. Now, I'm not asking for your jobs plan here. What I'm asking for is, how are you going to turn this country around? We'll go down the row, 30 seconds each. Congressman Paul.
Government destroys jobs, the market creates jobs. So the government isn't going to be expected to create the jobs. They have to change the environment. But you can't do that unless you understand where the depression, recessions come from. And you can't understand that unless you know where the bubbles come from. I've been arguing this case for 20 years and warning about bubbles and housing bubbles and NASDAQ bubbles, and a lot of other economists have been doing the same thing. Until we understand that, you can't solve the problem. You have to deal with the Federal Reserve System. You have to deal with free markets, and you have to deal with the tax program and the regulatory system. Then you can get your jobs, because the people will create the jobs, not the government.
Waiting for the applause. If you had to choose a running mate, one of the people on the stage with you, who would you choose and why? 30 seconds down the row. Governor Johnson.
Sorry. Well, that would be the guy 3 down, Congressman Paul, and that would be the notion that this country is about liberty and freedom, and that right now we are facing an extraordinary crisis, that if we do not address it now, we're going to find ourselves in a monetary crisis that is going to leave us all with nothing.
Congressman Paul, heard away.
I don't plan to make a choice at the moment, because I am on national polls. It seems like I'm in 3rd place now. I think it would be inappropriate As soon as I'm one of the two top tier, then I will start thinking along that line. But right now, I'm going to defer and just work very hard and make sure that I stay in the top tier and then eventually be one of the top two contenders.
Governor Perry.